This is a post-apocalyptic community, with a strong fence holding off thousands of zombies. However, today, the tall watchtower collapsed with a loud crash. The once sturdy fence was smashed, creating a breach and raising a cloud of dust. As the dust settled, zombies began to slowly enter the community. Faced with a massive horde of zombies, Rick quickly organized a retreat, urging everyone to return to their homes and secure the doors and windows. Meanwhile, he did his best to buy them time. This time Deanna didn't back down either. She wanted to change. Ron, who had planned to attack Carl, also became scared. Survival was now the top priority, considering the overwhelming number of zombies. Nearly all of the tens of thousands of zombies outside came in. Rick had just dealt with one when Deanna rushed to help, blocking the ones behind. Although they killed one zombie, Deanna was knocked down and her leg got caught in the lawnmower. Rick rushed to her rescue and then take her and retreat. Pregnant Maggie was also in grave danger, with zombies constantly lunging towards her. Several times, she narrowly avoided being grabbed. She could only fight and retreat with her rifle. She managed to eliminate the zombies getting too close, but their numbers were overwhelming, and her bullets ran out. All she could do was roll over and escape, trying to climb up the ladder to the sentry post. However, zombie tightly grabbed her leg, and she couldn't free herself. Even the securing rope was torn apart, and the ladder began to sway. Falling down would mean being devoured by the zombies. Fortunately, she managed to grab onto the nearby railing just in time, with all her strength, finding a foothold, and finally climbed onto the platform. As she lay down, she was almost paralyzed. If there had been even a slight mistake, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Morgan and Carol rushed into the house. Eugene, the coward, is frozen in fear, just staring at the zombies approaching him without daring to swing his knife. Fortunately, Rosita and Tara came to his rescue in time, pulling him along to escape. They eventually took refuge in a garage. Rick helped Deanna and they continued on their way. While the others converged towards them, Jessie arrives and she shoots to cover them to get them to her house. Judith happened to be there as well. They all hurriedly entered Jessie's house. At this point, the community was almost entirely infested with zombies. If there's any movement anywhere, they'll swarm. Jessie's house is also getting busy. Her young son, Sam, watched as Deanna was carried in. Recalling the sight of those monsters, he had been traumatized since the previous attack by the raiders and had never left his room again. Jessie didn't have time to comfort him but encouraged him to be strong. Michonne briefly tended to Deanna's leg wound, only to discover that she had been bitten on her abdomen by a zombie. Deanna also froze as she realized the implications. Rick looked at her with a sense of sorrow in his eyes. Meanwhile, Carl entered the garage and found Ron standing there, seemingly troubled. He assumed Ron was scared and tried to reassure him, saying that his dad would find a way. Ron immediately shut him up, adding sarcastically that his dad would only end up getting more people killed. That's the kind of man he is. A murderer. Carl, unperturbed, calmly stated that your dad was no different. Ron was left speechless and resolutely walked towards the door, locking it and removing the key. Carl was no novice and immediately pounced on Ron when he saw him reaching for a gun. They wrestled and knocked over shelves, sending the gun flying. Ron then picked up a shovel from the ground and swung it at Carl, who cleverly dodged the attack. The sound of glass breaking immediately caught the attention of the zombies outside, and they started heading towards the window. Upstairs, Rick and Jessie heard the commotion and tried to intervene, but they found themselves locked out of the room. The two continued fighting, while outside, the zombies pushed through the yard fence. Approaching the window, Carl almost got caught by a zombie. Ron, who had been knocked down, finally realized the consequences of his actions, putting everyone in danger. Carl desperately tried to use a cabinet to block the window. Rick, outside, was going insane, frantically destroying the lock with an axe. Ron didn't help fend off the zombies but instead picked up the handgun again. But at that moment, Rick and Jessie rushed in. They saw that zombies had already broken in, and without a lock on the door, they had to rely on themselves to hold them back. Rick brought in a sofa, hoping it would provide temporary resistance and stabilize the situation. Then he asked Carl what had happened. Carl didn't say anything bad about Ron. He simply said that he accidentally knocked over a toolbox. which attracted the zombies. Jesse knew that something was not right. It was clearly the sound of a fight. Carl still defended Ron, which made Ron feel somewhat embarrassed. He asked Carl to help him move a cabinet to block the door. Rick understood what was going on. When they entered the room, Carl closed the door, aimed his gun at Ron. He understood Ron's actions, but he couldn't allow him to continue like this. He had to retrieve Ron's handgun. Then he mentioned how his father killed Ron's father, but there are some things Ron needed to understand. Everyone knew that his father was a jerk. Ron just looked at him without saying a word, and it was unclear what he was thinking. Rosita and the others remained hiding in the garage. They decided to open the door and look inside the house. Eugene wasn't skilled in combat, but picking locks was his strong suit. Upstairs, Carol sat on the ground, closing her eyes to rest. While Morgan watched her closely, it was because there was an intruder locked in the basement, and he couldn't let Carol go down there. When Morgan turned his head again, Carol had disappeared. Suddenly, Carol pushed Morgan aside. She wanted to investigate the basement. When she arrived, she saw that Morgan had been hiding someone there, and Denise was still tending to his injuries. Carol quickly told Denise to keep her distance from the man. Morgan rushed down and stood between the two of them, trying to persuade Carol to calm down, but Carol outright refused, saying there was nothing to discuss. Morgan's thinking was even more peculiar. He believed they shouldn't become like those people, shouldn't kill like them, as long as they were alive. They had every possibility. They could keep him locked up, but there was no need to kill him. Carol didn't want to argue with this lunatic anymore. She just wanted to eliminate all the threats. Morgan was the biggest problem.
We'll kill you to kill him, because I don't want anyone else to die.
Carol was always the one with the clearest mind. Morgan swiftly struck down Carol's dagger, and they just wrestled with each other. But the disparity in their physical strength is too great. Morgan lost his temper and threw Carol to the ground, smashed her straight into unconsciousness. But at that moment, the intruder immediately picked up the dagger and aimed it at Denise. Denise had no fighting ability and was powerless to resist. All she could do was plead for them not to be killed, saying they could just let them die here. But the man's nature didn't change. He took the dagger and aimed it at Denise's neck, then laughed with glee. Fortunately, they arrived just in time. Denise has also become a lifesaver for men.
Lower the guns.
They had no choice but to lower their guns. Eventually, the man held Denise hostage and left. Meanwhile, the number of zombies on the first floor where Rick was grew increasingly. They could no longer hold them back, and the front door had been breached. They had to retreat to the second floor. Rick used a sofa to block the hallway, but it was just a temporary solution. He came up with an idea. They used a method they had used before.
I got this one. You get the one behind it. We're gonna need at least two.
Rick and Michonne dragged two zombie corpses into the house and instructed Gabriel to bring all the bed sheets. Then Rick addressed everyone, saying that their only chance of survival was to make their way to the armory, so they would gut the zombies, smear their flesh and blood on themselves to mask their scent, making the zombies think they were one of them. The others looked at Rick as if he were crazy, but Michonne wasted no time and began the process. Gabriel was on the verge of vomiting as he watched. Jessie and her son looked on in horror. After a while, everyone was ready. Michonne approached Deanna's bed and informed her about their plan to escape. Deanna knew she had no chance of survival and didn't want to burden them anymore. She simply told Michonne to go ahead. She had a pistol and in due course she would end it all herself. Gabriel struggled to suppress his disgust as he smeared the zombies' innards on the bed sheets. They had no other choice for survival. When everyone was prepared, Rick was ready to move forward and carry Judith, but Gabriel stopped him. He didn't know if he would survive this time and apologized for his previous actions. He made a promise that he wouldn't be the same as before, and he chose to follow them. He would never retreat. Rick nodded, as he wasn't a petty person. Soon, Rick brought Judith and placed her under Carl's bed sheet. Hope she doesn't cry in the middle of it. The operation officially began. Rick gently moved the sofa aside, and zombies were right in front of him. His mental strength was already incredibly strong, and with a calm expression, he walked towards the outside. The zombies also see them as kindred spirits. The others followed nervously behind. As they made their way to the door, there were more zombies outside. They had to remain composed and make no sound. Otherwise, their fate would be miserable. Riker continued to lead the way and they held hands. They maneuvered through the horde of zombies. Outside the perimeter, Glenn and Enid climbed up a tree and finally saw what was happening inside. But Glenn quickly spotted someone he had been longing to see. Maggie's situation was also not optimistic.